Next presenter, Jay Barron, who's been over there troubleshooting with me, of Elevate Demand, is going to talk about these things, but in a way you may not have thought about for your school. Jay is an expert in growth marketing and strategic narratives. He's helped us at Element rethink how we connect with potential clients, and we're thrilled to have him here. So I'm going to give the floor to him since I've taken up enough time already. Here you go, Jay.
Thank you, everybody. And I think they saved the best for last because I'm probably going to, I don't want to say bash, but bash campaigns and content actually, because this fundamentally changed how I view marketing in my career. I founded, as they said, a growth agency. I work with Element right now. But throughout the years, I've done marketing my whole life. And one thing I learned is something I call the false struggle that maybe you feel, which is everybody always assumes that the ads are the problem, our emails the problem, our headlines the problem. And when those things aren't working, they go, well, you need to do more tests on your ads. You need to do more emails. You need to do more headlines. You need more landing pages. And I realized I came across this guy, Andy Raskin. I recommend you follow him on LinkedIn. He talks about strategic narrative. In my opinion, he's the creator of it, which is everything starts with the story. And that you have to have a compelling narrative that you're going to go out and do marketing around and things like that. And finding this, for me, fundamentally has changed my career because a lot of things are out of your control. Not just, it goes further than that. When I realized it, I realized everything changes in marketing. Email is not as effective as it used to be, and that is accelerating at the rate of change that it's going to happen. Running ads are not as effective as they used to be. Creating content, and now you have a pandemic on top of it. You can't control that. There's more competition than ever before. You combine that with a shrinking student pool and everything else, and you can't control any of that. And I think at least for higher education, like it's evolving even faster, and why this narrative thing is so important to me. Number one, and this isn't just this, like it's everything. I call it the buyer, honestly, or students, or everything we do. They control everything now. They have total control of when they interact, when they want to do a buying decision, when they fill out a form to interact with you. They have total control of that stuff now. And if you don't give them the information and things like that up front, they just go somewhere else. And like the other reason I bring this up is because it means marketing is just getting harder. Like we've reached a point where we just turn a lot of that stuff off. The other change that's really happening right now is for the generation that's 35 and younger, what I call it is they don't live just digital lives first, they live digital lives only, which is they're the first generation that's born just in technology. So they don't want to do a form and then go to an analog touch point, right? Which is, we're gonna do, I even put email as analog in my opinion, which is back and forth emails, it's slow, then you're gonna do a phone call. Like, we don't wanna interact like that anymore. We want digital native touch points. And the last point on this, and why I think the narrative is so important, we'll get into a little bit further too, is this thing that's called dark social. And the best way to think about it is how we research and stuff, and COVID has really accelerated this, has changed because we do it through social now. We interact in LinkedIn communities. We interact in Discords and Slack communities. There's this thing called, I call it scalable word of mouth now, which is there's conversations going on about your school, about marketing, about anything that we're buying or trying to do. You cannot track what goes on in those conversations. You don't even know they're influencing things, but they do happen, and they happen way more than people realize. And you actually have to create marketing now that I call works in dark social, or works in the feed of the social channels, because that's where we get all of our content consumption. And I don't really go to websites anymore, honestly. I spend most of my day on LinkedIn and Facebook. And that makes up the most of it. So with all of this change, and I only say there's one thing you can control, I want to leave one little nugget with you, because I've realized this as well. There's actually two things you can control. It's what you learn, number one, because everything does change. If you're running email, I can tell you in 90 days what worked is not going to work. Facebook, your landing pages, everything changes. You can control what you learn. And then the other thing that you can control is your story. And that is what we're going to talk about. How do we actually create a compelling brand narrative, I call it, which will influence, in my opinion, everything you do in marketing, how you actually communicate everything about your school. It has fundamentally transformed how I view it. Because otherwise, this is the type of stuff I found for most of the stories out there. And I didn't try to find these. I just found them doing Google searches for institutions. And everybody right now is saying the same thing. What makes us special? Our faculty, our facilities, our campus life. I look at that as that's an expectation. Students expect that. So if that's your message that you're going out into your audience, like they don't really care. We actually have reached a point where we just turn that stuff off, right? I see several that talk about, I kind of interesting, right? Like one school will say we're in the top 200. So I think the other school must have thought, well, we'll just say we're in the top 1%. That's better than the top 200. We have 450 programs. You have big goals. We have your back, right? Like, well, what school doesn't? I hope they all have my back. We are committed to providing transformative experiences. This is what we're going to market with. And the other thing as I talk about a narrative and why it's important, when you think about all these messages that we're getting bombarded with, this is really for the bottom of the funnel, which means you're ignoring 90% of your audience that probably doesn't know what school they want to go to. They're not sure what career direction they're going to take. Like we built our entire marketing engines and websites for a very small percentage of our actual audience. And that's kind of what a narrative actually seeks to fix, because the story is not these things. It's not your history, it's not your mission, it's not your values, it's not your faculty, but this is what most people start to move with. When they go back, if I go back, right? Eventually, usually people realize this doesn't work. So then they go to this next iteration, which is, well, we got to talk more about us and show them why we're better and why we're the best. And we have all this different stuff that why they'd want to attend here. But what I believe and what you need to talk about is students, and I think faculty and everything else. So as I go through this and I talk about a narrative a bit more, I think what you're going to find is, man, like that's big. Like how the hell can I impact this? Because it is, when you actually get this right, and I'm going to talk through some examples, like it becomes a movement that you're trying to build. And it actually becomes bigger than probably something that we can do in marketing alone. But I've written a few dozen narratives now. We actually work in starting in marketing to gain traction, to show people the power of what building a story is like. Because as you gain traction, people actually get excited about this idea. And I get excited about it. Like the one thing I realized in all of my career of doing marketing, the one thing I never really spent time on was making sure we got the story right. And when I look back, that was always the biggest miss, why my marketing never truly connected, because we never had the right story. So compelling stories for me start with a compelling brand narrative. And the reason I call it a narrative is you want to do your marketing, your story, where your audience is in their current state of mind, which is they have a narrative in their head right now, a story they are telling themselves about winning. Maybe it's about school, how the world works, their course and career direction, all of that. They have a story in their head they're telling themselves. Your marketing and message has to start there. You have to start the story where your audience is in your head. So the narrative has 4 key elements. That's a good one. We'll talk through. Sorry, that was a terrible joke too, that we'll talk through. Number 1 is the old way. So don't think about this as in we're going to talk something about old. What we want to do when we think about a narrative is we want to make a belief that our audience has an old way to win. They're telling themselves a story right now. We want to tell them, hey, you have this belief. That belief you have actually is not going to be relevant. You need to change. By the way, if you don't change, there's actually consequences that can come with it. You will feel this pain or consequence, and I'm going to go through examples as well, and I'm sure there might be questions and stuff too. We can break this down. I love this stuff. I'm so passionate about the narratives, but it's not just, oh, here's what you believe. Here's what you believe. Here's what happens if you continue this belief. And by the way, there's actually a new way to win. So now what I call it is we're actually trying to shift our audience's belief. Otherwise, if you're trying to reach the truly top of funnel, what I have found, this is the only way to do it. You have to create messaging that starts with their current beliefs and habits and actually change their beliefs and habits. So the new way is the way that you need them to believe to win. What do we want our audience to believe to be true? And here's what's interesting in all three of these points. None of these should have anything to do with what you do. You're not trying to communicate programs. You're not trying to communicate all that top 1% stuff. This is really about their beliefs. And then at the end, you can show them how they create winners, or how you create winners with this new belief. And I'm going to show you some examples, like larger companies that you're probably aware of. Just think about it very simply. If you want to think about a narrative, it's old way, new way. Like that's the basis or basic version of thinking about this. So I'm assuming we're all familiar with Salesforce at least. A lot of people don't realize what really made them big. I truly believe it's because they had a compelling narrative to start. They didn't go out and attack Oracle. They didn't attack any of their competition. All they did is go to their audience and say, what you believe is software. There's a new way to win. They did a huge campaign, actually. They went to one of their Oracle's conferences, and they did signs that just said no more software. They had press that came out. They did a bunch of coverage on it. But all they did was go out with a story around a shift in the buyer's world that you no longer need software on your desktop. And that's honestly how they became the monster that they are right now. Another really easy one, actually, Dollar Shave Club. People don't realize how many narratives are actually out there, but Dollar Shave Club came out, right? They didn't attack any of the brands. They didn't attack any of the razor companies. They just attacked a story that we have told ourselves for years about how to get razors, right? I need a razor. I got to go to Walgreens. It costs an arm and a leg to do it. And they showed me that, nope, there's a new belief and a new way to win, that I can get razors shipped to me right to my door. And they went out with that narrative. They didn't go out. They didn't even really talk about their competition, actually. They just talked about a new way to actually win. Tesla is also a great example of this. If you actually watch Elon Musk's presentations, almost everything he does is around a strategic narrative, right? He did a presentation around this, and I can even show you how he did like pain and consequences, right? So he talked about accelerating the world's transition to sustainable energy. And the next slide he had after this was that emissions causes like 50,000 deaths a year, right? He didn't go after car companies. He didn't do any of the competition. He doesn't attack people. He just works on shifting people's beliefs to a new way to win in this new world. So let's break down a few narratives in higher ed, and then I'll go through how you can actually go to market with this as well. So old way, what does your audience currently believe? So again, what's that narrative that they have in their head right now? What's the story they are telling themselves? The best way I start to think about this, and by the way, this is really hard stuff to come up with, like, because a lot of people don't get the shift has to be big enough, right? Like when I go back to those examples, like fossil fuel versus sustainable energy, like that's a huge shift in the buyer's world, right? So you really have to start and take a step back is, what kind of students do we want to attract, number one? I think number two, what fields of study do we want to promote? And this is where a lot of people get stuck. What do they actually believe then? What do they believe about those fields of study? What do they believe about their career path, about winning? I mean, in my opinion, if I was looking to go to school right now, I'd probably want a school that's talking about a big shift in the career path that I'm going to take, that I need to get ahead of before do I go to another school that's just promoting what's going on right now, right? Like I want to be ready for the future. So you actually have to get in your audience's head and understand, what do they believe to be true about winning? Another way to think about it, because a lot of people, when they think about narrative, they think about it as like, oh, I have to tell them they're doing it wrong. That's not true. I look at it more as your audience probably already has an inkling or a feeling already about this in their head. Nobody's put it to words yet, though, and that's kind of the goal. Even like some of what I said, right? You might have felt it a little bit like, When marketing is not working, what's the first thing people do? Well, let me see your email. Let me see your landing page. Let me see your ads. It's got to be that stuff, right? Like, that's what people believe. I need to shift their belief that, like, that's not the problem. And actually, I kind of have an example here for Element a little bit of how we went through this. So number one, when you finally come up with that old way, you have to name it, right? When you think about the other examples, you have to give a name to what that old way is. So we call it institution-led, which is the school thinks they have all the power. That's the old way to win, right? It's analog student recruiting where clients have to get the information, they have to request it, and then you have to push it out from them. And then we started to map what maps to this old way example. Oh, number two, so when you think about the old way, you have to have pains and consequences that go with it. If there's not pains and consequences, I have no reason to change my beliefs, right? And actually, one more thing too, like as we walk through this, you can think about it from the funnel. Like if you're trying to engage with the top of the funnel, then the way you would do that is I would start with the narrative, right? What's the old way? What do you believe about winning? That's where I would start my marketing and stuff. Then I would start showing people, here's the consequences if you continue that belief. 2 points when you think about this, the stakes have to feel big, like almost life or death, right? Like, if they're not big, relevant shifts, it's just not going to hit home. It's like, I can dismiss that. I'm not a big deal. And it has to create urgency. I have to feel the need to act. It almost is, if I do not act with this, these are the consequences. I have to act now. And you can kind of get a feel then. So we started to map pain and consequences just to share what this looks like, right? Like some of the consequences in the Element example, fewer enrolled students. And by the way, I truly believe if we're dealing with a shrinking student pool, this is how you grow your own pool. A lot of people talk about this thing like creating demand. To do that to an extent, the only way I have found to do it is this. You have to have a compelling story that would allow you to do something I call create demand, essentially, right? And I'd even like to use the word create demand because it implies that we as marketers, I guess, have that power. I call it more attract growth. If you're going to attract people and more people than anybody else, that's how you would do it. So mapping that, I won't read all these. I can leave it up for a second though. So as you go through this, so you got your old way, your pain and consequences, then there's a new way. So the new way is, this is what you believe now. Here's what I need you to believe. Here's the pain and consequences that go with it. We're essentially doing what I call shifting their beliefs. I want you to have a new belief about how the world works, about how you view your career path. Because if you do this as well, where else are they going to go to school? I could not think of any. If you shift my beliefs and truly do this, there isn't competition in my opinion. So think about it through a few ways, right? What's the new way of winning that you see? Another way to think about this is, can we actually create a movement around this? So I'll give you a really simple example. Think about what HubSpot did. I'm sure, again, since I mentioned Salesforce, we can think about HubSpot and how big they are. HubSpot went into the marketing automation category, which is insanely crowded. There's hundreds of solutions in that space. What is their new way example? Inbound. They created a movement, inbound marketing, that resonated with their market, but that's just simply an old way, new way to me, right? The new way for them was inbound marketing. But they really created a huge movement around the idea of inbound marketing. What do we want our audience to believe? And can we name it? So when you think about the old way, right? We named the old way. We also want to name the new way. What I want you to believe, in this example, right? Student-centered experience. Digital native touch points where the students can pull the information. What do you get? Well, it works in dark social, so you get scalable word of mouth. It looks like instant communication, automated student experiences, attracts more diverse students, right? So as you start bulleting this out and kind of thinking about this, this is the easiest way to think about some of the examples. You want to name that old way and then name the new way. And then this is where you can show winners, right? So how are you uniquely suited to help your audience and students win in this new way? You can map programs and courses to this new narrative. This is where you start to introduce and almost, I don't want to say sell, but I guess that's kind of what we're doing. Sell them on why they would choose your school. This is also, in my opinion, where you might introduce some of that top 1% language and stuff like that. But it doesn't matter as much if I can, again, shift their beliefs into the story I want them to believe. You don't need that other messaging as much anymore. And then when you think about your social proof as well, so it's not just mapping programs and courses and things like that, it's actually creating social proof around the narrative. So students that maybe had a belief, that have a new belief system or a new understanding of this new way to win. And I do think, although it was difficult, there are actually some decent examples in higher ed pulling this off. I found University of North Dakota. One, they look at it from leadership comes from a position or title. Leadership comes from action. I think the one thing they are missing, though, is like strong pains and consequences. But I can see where a lot of people would believe this about winning and how they become a leadership, that it becomes, oh, I have to be a CEO or I need a certain title to be a leader or something like that, right? Well, in their example, what they want you to believe is leader comes from action, and that's what they're going to help you do. They have success stories and things like that map student experiences back to this narrative. This is one example. Another one I found was Unity College. Kind of actually like the Tesla angle a little bit, right? But they focus on fossil fuels and energy efficiency is not enough. So if you were going to get into environmental sciences or anything honestly on the environment or anything like that, their focus, and actually I think they have one of the stronger narratives that I found, is to accelerate the world towards sustainable growth. If you believe this story or this new way, where are you going to go to school? Well, it's pretty obvious. And then another one I found, which is just a different way to think about it, right? Actually, I'm from Wisconsin, so if you're wondering my accent, that's where I'm from. So I did find this there, right? Crushing college debt, I think we all kind of feel that or believe that as tuition costs have rise, that it takes a lot of debt to get through school. They have a very nice narrative that they've rolled out on their website: retrain and retool tuition free. I'm going to go through two more slides then, which is, I talked about that narrative stuff, but how does this kind of work in theory? I'll give you two examples of how we view it and how we look at it. Number one is, I don't know why when I think about what we've done in marketing and I talk about, we focus on the 5%. Right? The people that are going to go to school immediately are the people that are ready to buy. When you think about marketing, like that's all I ever see when I'm going through my LinkedIn feed and my Facebook feed. It's everybody talking like I'm ready to buy right now. So when I go to a website then, we've kind of convinced ourselves that if they're not ready to buy, they're going to find our content and our blog and that's where we're going to go. And I've never done that. I don't believe that happens. Usually what happens is they leave. So when you think about your narrative, two things that I would think about is one, my recommendation usually just launch a start here page, which is if I'm a cold audience, I'm not quite sure what I'm doing, I'm just looking around, I can tell you the first place I'm going to click is somewhere called start here. And that's where you'd introduce your narrative. You'd walk them through, this is what we believe, this is the pain and consequences of these beliefs, this is the new way that people are winning, and then how you create winners. Don't look at the YBU page, but this is another example. The reason I tell you not is YBU is all about them, right? But if you don't want to start here, you could do like a Y page and use that to talk about your narrative. That's what I would focus on, is a place that we send the 90% of our audience that is not ready to make a decision, that has no idea what they're doing. We need to send them to a place to do what I call, again, shifting their beliefs. I just want to start them on that journey to realize there's a different way to win. And then when you think about, as you get your narrative and how do we actually start mapping content and campaigns to this new narrative, I look at it through three buckets. This completely changes how I view the traditional funnel, which is what most people say, right? Like talk about pain points and walk them and then they're going to buy, right? I look at the funnel through this lens. I look at it through beliefs and habits. Number one, start with what your audience believes to be true. That's what you do with your cold audiences. You want to start with where they're at in their head and connect with that. If you're not, your marketing will almost always miss. even if you're like, well, we're not going to go after the 2%, like a lot of people go after the people that are maybe, I guess the only way I know how to think about it is, right, they're pain aware a little bit. Like, oh, okay, there's just not enough of those audiences out there. If you want to grow, like I said, you can grow your student pool. You start by there. If you can create a story that connects where somebody's at, that's how you grow your student pool. It doesn't matter if it's shrinking if you have a story that connects with where they're at, because you're basically creating your own story and your own pool at that point. As you get people and they move through the funnel, how I think about it is you want to show them what you want them to believe. Again, what's that new way? You can also weave in pain and consequences if they don't shift their beliefs and things like that. But here's what you believe. I've created that story that starts off where you're at in your head. Now I need to show the pain and consequences and show you what I want you to believe. What's the story I need you to believe about winning? And then the how audiences, this is where you'd introduce what you actually do, right? So I've shifted your beliefs. You have a new way to win. Now let me show you how we help you win with those new beliefs. That's it. I don't know, did I go fast? It felt like I did. Hopefully there's questions or something. We did go late too with all the technical difficulties. Go ahead.
So my question, you talked a lot about getting into the minds of where students or where your buyers are.
Yeah.
I mean, are you making some assumptions on that? Are you doing market research?
Yeah.
Surveys? How are you actually making that happen?
Yeah, really hard. I have found if you do so there's interesting things with narratives that I've learned. One, it exposes how little you actually know about your audience. A lot of people think they know their audience very well until they actually try to get into their beliefs and habits. Going back to what I said, which is what you can control, this is the expanded version. You can control what you learn, what you do with those learnings, and how fast you learn. That's what I truly believe. Your only control is those three things plus your story. So that's actually why we usually recommend like that Start Here page. I would actually launch that immediately because you get market feedback really quickly. The other thing we look at, it's like when we measure it, we actually say it launches part of your main navigation because I need to get people to it as fast as possible. I actually recommend most people do like hero button images on the homepage. I recommend doing a Start Here button there as well. Again, because 90% of your audience isn't ready to go deeper like we think they are. And then I would use that as my gauge to see how my story is resonating. So in some ways you actually have to place a bet because if you try to ask your audience a little bit, you're not going to get there, honestly. So it is, yes, you can talk to people, and I recommend doing that. But I ultimately think that you actually really have to go to market and try it and learn from it and then try to go deeper. But the number one challenge is I guarantee you probably won't be deep enough on your first try because most people just don't get there. Why do I think this works? So two things are going on. One, I think marketing is getting harder and harder at this point. I think us as an audience, or just all of us, we've shut off ads. I don't look at them. I don't look at marketing. I don't respond to it. And things like that. The other shifts that are happening is like that dark social thing. So here's another thing a lot of people don't realize. If you're trying to reach your audience in Facebook, LinkedIn, and all these platforms, they no longer want you to leave their platforms. Period. They like LinkedIn, you know what they measure as their number one metric? How long you're on their platform. They do not want you to leave. The only way that you can really then engage is starting, what I would read and consume at least, is starting with something I believe and challenging that belief almost. Because the other thing you can do then is you can create content, what I call in the feed. You can create content in the feed around this narrative that'll resonate really well with your audience. It is when marketing's not working, I have finally realized it's typically because we don't have the right story. And far too many times, at least what I've realized is most people don't look at it through that lens. They go, another way I look at it is all data will actually point to that you have a marketing issue. Because people will go, well, your landing page isn't converting very well. It's got to be the landing page. Well, your email click-through rate's really low. We need to test more emails, right? And what I have found is that's what I call the false struggle. That's what people get stuck in, when really the bigger issue probably is you're not talking to your audience in a compelling way, and you don't have the right story to connect with them. And that's truly why I believe it works.
Are you creating content and marketing at each one of those 4 buckets? Or which ones are you looking at certain parts of that?
Yeah, so it'll sort of take the testing further. When you think about this, I almost always start very heavily up towards the top, right? I can think about, so I typically work in a B2B lens, right? So maybe this will give you a little more thoughts around it too, which is when you think about when people try to sell us software, Element's trying to sell us CRM software and things like that, or others, right? What they would typically do is they would go, I'm going to tell you about your pain points, right? And then I'm going to show you why you need our solution. I have found 2 things. That pool is really small. So when I think about it, I think about how much of our market is ready to buy something now, 1% to 2%. How much of our market actually understands or cares about pain points? Probably only 5 to 10%. They either don't care enough about pain to solve it, or they're not going to act on it. Or they don't even know it's there, right? Which means you're leaving 90% of your audience just out there because none of that's going to resonate with them. So that's where you'd start with actually the beliefs then. So when I think about where I'm heavy, it's probably in the cold audience, which is I'm going to go out and show you about this what you're believing right now and why you need to change that belief. Cool. Thank you.